With Christian Bale set to play the cosmic villain Gorr the God Butcher in Thor 4, Thor Love and Thunder, and with set photos in early August 2021 giving us our first look at Gorr, it's the perfect time to brush up on Gorr's comic book story so that you're ready for his debut in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Thanks for watching JLS Comics. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe. I upload videos like this every week. Okay, here's the story. And our first stop on this journey is the beginning of this iteration of the Marvel Universe, the beginning of time. As with all things in the Marvel Universe, there's a homeostatic balance pervasive throughout the universe. Where there's an action, a reaction. Where there's up, there's down. Where there's push, there's pull. Where there's yin, there's yang. Where there's death, there's life, expansion, contraction. Light is balanced by darkness. After the destruction of a previous iteration of the Marvel Universe by Black Winter, the universe burst forth in a big bang to create a new universe. But in between those events, there was a dark, bleak void of nothingness and oblivion. In fact, Oblivion formed into a sentient yet abstract cosmic entity which embodied the idea of nothingness and which also gave birth to a primordial god named Null. Galactus and the Celestials were able to pass through into this new universe. The light where the Celestials lived eventually encroached on the darkness where Null rested. Enraged, Null forged a terrible weapon named All Black the Necrosword out of a material which was the first of the Clintar, the first symbiote of which Venom and Carnage are a part. Null, the Exelon god, the Void King, the King in Black, used this sword to behead a Celestial and became the first God Butcher. Null was eventually taken down and later trapped in a Clintar planet cage by his own creations. The sword found its way to a planet with no name. This was a harsh, barren land devoid of gods and devoid of mercy. And this was the planet, the home of a young boy named Gorr. Both of Gorr's parents died when he was young, and there were no gods to answer his prayers. He was alone. After he grew up, Gorr had a wife named Ara, and Ara birthed a son named Agar. Pregnant with their second child, Gorr's wife Ara died in an earthquake, and he lost his wife and the baby in the process. And then with no food and nowhere to go, his only son Agar died in his arms. And still, no gods answered a grieving Gorr's call. While still grieving the loss of his family, Gorr stumbled across the King in Black, Null, who'd escaped from his Clintar cage, who was now fighting with a gold-clad god. Gorr, hoping a god would finally answer his calls, begged Null to help him. Null's Necrosword bonded with Gorr, and there, Gorr killed that golden god Null was battling with, his first god kill, and Gorr liked it. His first thought was, are there more? And from there, Gorr set out across the cosmos, slaying entire pantheons from untold numbers of civilizations. At one point, he found and tortured Thor's Asgardian friend Volstagg of the Warriors 3, and Volstagg said, you want to kill all gods, but at the end there will still be one, you. And Gorr was horrified at the thought. Eventually, Gorr found his way to the Milky Way and to the solar system which was home to Earth. And this was in the 9th century AD. And there we switch from Gorr to Thor. Thor's Gorr story begins in 893 AD on the west coast of Ireland. A young Thor Odinson was at a seaside village that had been terrorized by a frost giant for weeks. That's when the remains of a butchered god washed ashore. The villagers were aghast as Thor lifted the severed head skyward. I've seen war in the heavens, he said. I've seen gods suffer and bleed. I've seen immortal fathers subject their own sons to torments you could never imagine. I've seen hell itself, but no, I've never seen anything like the horror in this god's eyes. And that was our first introduction to the unholy god butcher known and feared across the cosmos named Gorr. Thor sailed out on the stormy Baltic Sea with an army of Vikings in a longship. As the sea grew calm and a fog banking shrouded their wooden vessels, a ghastly and ghostly creature watched between wisps of fog, hovering just above the water. That being was Gorr. His first words in the book were, I smell god flesh. As Thor and his party made landfall in what is now called Russia, they discovered the bodies of Slavic gods Perrin and Chernobog the Black. As the clouds dripped with god blood, Thor mounted Perrin's Pegasus and flew up into the sky where still Gorr the God Butcher watched the god of thunder. A black mass swirled and twisted itself on Gorr's ghostly white forearm, forming itself into an edged weapon. The hunter was now the hunted. Gorr used the all-black sword from his forearm to cleave off the head of the winged horse that Thor was riding on and then confronted a rather startled Thor. But Thor wasn't done. He switched over to Chernobog's black Pegasus, and there, high in the clouds, Thor and Gorr battled for the first time. Gorr said that Thor would be his first Asgardian kill. Thor wielded a Yarnborn, his powerful battle axe, which was forged in the kiln of the dwarves, and he used this against Gorr and his all-black Necrosword. Thor managed to get a hit in on Gorr, stabbing his ribcage with the sharpened wooden handle end of his battle axe. And Gorr, with yellow eyes and sharpened teeth and his Voldemort nose, lashed out with Necrosword's Clintarian tendrils, striking Thor in the chest and torso. The cold, cruel Gorr overpowered the god of thunder, and as they fell out of the sky, Gorr impaled Thor with the necro sword. And Gorr taunted the Asgardian, saying, "What are you the god of?" And there, amidst the clouds, high up in the air, Thor replied, "Thunder." And then he called down his hammer Mjolnir with a mighty lightning bolt that knocked the God Butcher right out. The two tumbled to the ground and crashed right into the snow, making the earth tremble and shattering the ground into a crater of dirt and snow. Thor was out for days as his Norseman friends found him and nursed him back to health. And Thor awoke and immediately headed back out to find Gorr. In the frigid Arctic air and tumbling snow, Thor came across a slain and dying Hinkon, Siberian god of the hunt, who told him that Gorr was waiting for him in a cave nearby, and to find it, all he had to do was follow the screams. Thor entered the cave and Gorr attacked the young Asgardian prince, mimicking the voice of Thor's mother Freya, truly showing Thor the depths of his evil, the fathomless nature of his horror. And young Thor was nearly consumed by Gorr's darkness. Gorr tied up Thor with chains and hung the bloodied Asgardian from the roof of the dark cave. Gorr wanted to know all Thor knew about the Asgardians, but Thor was defiant, and so Gorr, adept in the ways of torture, got to work on Thor, trying to figuratively and literally pull the answers right out of him. Gorr interrogated Thor for 17 days, and on the 17th day, Thor's Viking raiding party friends found him, and a phalanx of Vikings lashed out with swords and spears and arrows and struck that monster down. They continued to stab and slice at Gorr, and Gorr begged them to stop. He said he was there to liberate them from divine servitude. Gorr was about to rise up and kill the humans, but then Thor, now free of his chains, cleaved off Gorr's arm with his massive battle axe. These terrible, dark creatures, formed from that Clintarian amorphous blob, surged forward in darkness, but then suddenly began to dissolve and disappear. And Gorr, everyone thought, was dead. In the days that followed, Thor ate and drank and slept with Asgardian shield maiden Lady Sif, but still the thought of Gorr haunted his mind. One night, the black berserkers, those terrible black creatures, those hellhounds of Gorr, attacked Thor's night-enshrouded, snow-capped village. And they pulled Thor through the ground into a portal that took him to a blood pool where, Gorr says, gods go to die. This Thor was taken to the future and forced to witness the building of the God Bomb. More on that in a minute. In the present, Thor had traveled to the distant planet of Indigar, answering the call of a youngling from the planet. And there he discovered the slaughtered remains of the lost gods of Indigar, all dead, an entire pantheon slain, a mystery begging to be solved. Thor ruminated quietly in that house of horrors, realizing he hadn't seen such horrors since that terrible night off the coast of Ireland in 893 AD. And then a guard dog, one of Gorr's massive hellhounds, attacked. Thor said that this looked to be the work of Gorr the God Butcher, though he knew not if the Kingslayer was still alive. It took hours, but Thor eventually struck down the servant of Gorr. And from there, Thor flew with Mjolnir to the halls of the All-Knowing, racing against Gorr's bloodthirst, searching for answers. And Thor made it to this hall of All-Knowing, which was home to the Parliament of Pantheons and the Nexus of the Gods. The Pantheon librarian took Thor to the Hall of the Lost, a record of gods who had disappeared with nary a word, for this was no list of retirees. Nay, this was Gorr's kill list. Thor headed out from planet to planet, searching for the lost gods, finding deity after deity dead and slain, carnage created by the hounds of Gorr. Thor found one of the creatures and decapitated it, hoping it had an actual connection to its master Gorr. He raised the creature's head, black blood dripping down the God of Thunder's arm, and angrily bellowed at the world, "God Butcher, how many more of your dogs must I dismember before you come out and face me, you coward?" And then he called down the storms and shouted that if Gorr wanted to kill the gods, well, come and get some. Later, Thor called Iron Man for assistance. On Earth, they flew back to Russia to the cave where Thor, centuries ago, had his first encounter with Gorr. In the cave, Thor met with a god that said he was the god of wine and waterfalls named Shadrach, whom Gorr had decided to keep alive. Gorr wanted a witness to his terror, and so he'd made his prisoner Shadrach watch as he killed all around him. So Shadrach hid out in that cave, the one place Gorr would no longer go. But we'll find out later that wasn't the full story. He told Thor not to go find Gorr, for Gorr would soon find them. And then he mentioned Kronox. So Thor took Shadrach to Omnipotent City and the Nexus of the Gods to see the librarian, but they were too late. The librarian was wounded. Another beast, a black berserker, had attacked, and that's when the librarian told Thor that Kronox, the place that Shadrach had mentioned, was not a person, it was not a god, it was a hidden world. Thor took off and flew to Kronox and to the Palace of Infinity. But Gorr was already there, his monsters killing all and draining their blood into the Pool of Forevers. Gorr was there to use the power of the time gods of Kronox to time travel. Gorr waded in the blood pool and traveled back to the void, back 14 billion years ago to the beginning. And there, as he tumbled through darkness and lies, he said, "I have slain my way through multitudes to stand here at the genesis of it all. Blackened with vengeance, wet with holy blood, one simple dream still strong in my heart, the dream of a godless age." He stole the heart of an elder god and brought it back through the portal, back through the blood pool in Chronix, because his heart was critical to his god bomb. And there, with a head in his hands, he climbed out of the blood pool. And right then, that's when Thor showed up and smashed Gorr to the ground with his hammer Mjolnir. Thor continued striking and attacking Gorr, and Gorr continued to contemplate Thor's true motivations and prattle on with verbosity. He then started beating on Thor and telling him about that day in the cave, centuries ago, where the Vikings beat him. He said that day taught him that mortals fear godlessness, and that Gorr realized he couldn't do his job alone anymore. So, he told Thor, Thor saved Gorr. Quite the opposite of what Thor thought he did, which was killing him. And so that's why Gorr, right now, was sparing Thor from death. Gorr then had one of the time gods program the time pool, and when it was done, Gorr used one of his head tendrils to stab the Lord through his face. But then, Thor again stabbed Gorr with Yarnborn and hacked him apart. As Gorr stumbled into the blood-red pool, he disappeared. Gorr had gone to the future, and Thor chased him. We'll put a pin in this, remember this moment. Meanwhile, while this was happening, Shadrach was still with the librarian. It turns out that Shadrach was no god of waterfalls, he was actually the god of bombs, and Gorr had forced Shadrach to build a terrible moon-sized weapon called God Bomb. And that God Bomb was built around the heart of an elder god, that same heart that Gorr had stolen from the beginning of time. Gorr killed all of Shadrach's pantheon, and he went insane because of it, and he was forced to design the God Bomb, and when the design was complete, Shadrach managed to escape, and he hid out in the cave, and that's where Thor found him. And now we head to the future. In the future, many millennia from now, an aged Thor, as the last living god of Asgard, stood down a massive horde of those fearsome creatures. He fought there like a god, unleashing blood and thunder. He fought there, the final stand of the gods, like a king, a hero, selfless, ready to fight and die for it all if necessary. And he gave it his all, but the sheer numbers were overwhelming, and the elder god Thor was consumed again by Gorr's darkness. The darkness formed as Gorr's hellhounds and managed to carry Thor's broken body to the throne room, where they laid him upon his stone seat. Gorr was torturing this old Thor, bringing him to death's doorstep and yet keeping him alive. Thor crawled outside his palace and called for Mjolnir to come to his hand, and he struck the ground, shattering Asgard and all the black berserker beasts of Gorr with it. And Thor continued to use his last bits of energy to take the fight back to the black. And that is where the younger Thor who chased Gorr at the time pool appeared, awash in the blood of the black beasts. For Thor it was instantaneous, but he landed 900 years after Gorr arrived and razed future Asgard to the ground and gave rise to the now centuries-old kingdom of Gorr. The two Thors talked and caught up as they prepared to sail to a dead, blackened planet on the edge of space where Gorr had called home his black berserkers and which was being converted into the God Bomb weapon from Shadrach's blueprints. That planet was the unholy world of Gorr and the Mount of God Bomb, where the Thor of the past was now captured and forced to live as a slave. And this 9th century slave Thor met the goddesses of thunder, other slaves, and these three ladies turned out to be his own future grandchildren. There he also met Gorr's son, a young boy who'd been constructed from that same primordial goo that formed the berserkers. This boy was seemingly brainwashed, as he called his father Gorr the Redeemer. This 9th century Thor took the bomb that his granddaughters made and took it to destroy the God Bomb. It didn't work, but he managed to escape the planet, and this young Thor linked up with present-day Thor and future Thor on their Asgardian longship. And together all three Thors readied their weapons and prepared for the final fight. The mighty Allfather Thor struck Gorr so hard he was shot to a planet light years away, and in that moment, finally, Gorr knew fear. The three Thors attacked Gorr, and the Butcher called to his berserkers to send him more power. And all three Thors continued to wail on Gorr, driving the Butcher into the heart of a burning sun, which in turn took away their own energy. Gorr then landed on his planet of slaves, with the three Thors, devoid of energy, strewn lifeless at his feet. But then Gorr's primordial goo girlfriend said Gorr was worthy of worship, that he was her god, and he said what he said to Volstagg centuries ago in response to her calling him a god. "What did you say?" And he killed her. "I am no god," he declared heartlessly. The Thors reawoke, and one Thor confronted Gorr's son while another Thor, beaten and laying in Gorr's arms as his heart was about to be pulled from his body, leaned forward and ate Gorr's eyeball. Then, desperate, Gorr triggered the God Bomb, and so the Thor from the present day took 2 hammers, 2 Mjolnirs, glowing and crackling with power, one in each hand, and he struck out as the God Bomb detonated, killing trillions of Thors across every millisecond of Thor's life. Thor was trapped inside the God Bomb, and yet he managed to draw all of the power of the God Bomb into himself, keeping the blast from washing backwards through all of time and space as much as possible. Thor took all of that power, channeling it through his dual-wielded hammers, and directed the blast right at Gorr. Gorr crumbled to the ground, defeated. His son approached and told him he was the god of hypocrisy, that the mortal and the god were the same devil who killed his mother. You can't blame the gods anymore, his son said. It wasn't a god who betrayed you, it was only ever yourself. And then Gorr's son deformed into an amorphous blob of black primordial goo, and then Gorr was alone. And there on the ground defeated, the God Butcher kneeled. Thor took Bjornborn, his battle axe, and removed Gorr's head from his body. And thus ended the saga of Gorr the God Butcher. Or did it? Thinking it done, Thor went to Indgar and brought them rain and life and hope. He brought them their gods back. The being from which Gorr derived his power lived on, transformed. All Black, that first symbiote that once formed the Necrosword of Gorr, corrupted King Thor. And King Thor became Necro Thor, the god of butchers, the all-black Allfather. Necro Thor flew right through the body of Galactus, felling the cosmic being, and that act gave birth to New Midgard. Galactus, however, was corrupted by All Black, and Galactus became the Butcher of Worlds. Galactus and All Black formed Black Galactus and cut entire planets in half with his black blade with one swipe of the arm. So Ego the Living Planet flew up and battled with Black Galactus, begging him to stop eating his planet family. Galactus stabbed Ego right in the mouth, but then Ego ate Black Galactus' arm, and Ego became Ego the Necroworld. And so Necroworld ate Black Galactus as Loki looked on from afar. Yes, in King Thor, Loki took on the all-black power and became Loki the All-Butcher. And as Loki the All-Butcher stabbed Thor, he called himself Loki the Necro-God, the end of Asgard. Thor turned a planet into napalm and struck Necro-Loki, but it wasn't enough. Loki sliced open Thor and his innards spilled out across the spaceways. Thor threw Black Loki into a nearby sun, but Loki burst back forth as Necro-symbiote splayed open in an act of aggression. It looked like Loki was about to be stabbed to death, but then Loki was stabbed by Gorr. Though Gorr was decapitated, his essence lived on, trapped within the Necrosword. Loki called him out so that he could give him the power to finish what Loki could not. Thor blasted Gorr out into space, and there he floated dormant and still while repairing himself. Thor flew up to meet Gorr as Gorr called forth the Necrosword in its final form, the Anaya Blade, the Planet Cleaver. Loki showed up to say that he wanted to kill Thor, and he couldn't let Gorr get in his way, so he wrapped his rope around the Butcher's neck, and Gorr responded by cutting off Loki's arm at the elbow. So one-eyed Thor and one-armed Loki had to team up to defeat Gorr. Gorr was about to drown the two brothers in a sea of all black, but then the Goddess of Thunder appeared to strike at Gorr as well. The Skylords of Indgar also appeared, declaring themselves the true legacy of Gorr. The Goddesses of Thunder trapped Gorr in a circle and then took his head, and back into the Necrosword Gorr went. And then Gorr said he no longer needed a body, his new evolution beginning the Age of All Black. The darkness sucked away the light of the stars and everywhere was dark, even Midgard. Thor flew up on a shark to battle Gorr, and he traveled through a swirling black mass and was transported to All Black, the Necroverse. There, Gorr was the nothingness that was everything, and there he promised anti-Genesis, and to tear Thor apart in his black hole on a molecular level. Thor called forth a storm so powerful it shook the very edges of the Necroverse, and in the blinding light that pierced the all-blackness, Gorr was defeated. Later, during Donny Cates' King in Black Nullified saga, Null reacquired the Necrosword after millions of years and used it to battle Thor in the light. And he's still out there, still wielding it, though the light and Thor keep beating back the darkness. And with that, that's a wrap on this one, my friends. Thank you for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and you'll be one of the first to know when I upload videos just like this every single week. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.